When I came home from a 12-hour nursing shift, my marriage was already packed in 2 suitcases on the porch. My husband Caleb would not look at me. His mother, Vivienne Whittaker, stood behind him like a judge, and a 24-year-old woman was waiting in his truck to take my place. They said I had given him 6 years of nothing because Dr. Leland Fry had called me barren. My name is Rory Vance, but everyone in Briar Glen called me Rory, the nurse who could care for everyone except the family she was supposed to give her husband. What they did not know was that 1 medical file, 1 fake summary, and 1 payment hidden under Women's Health Outreach would turn Vivienne's charity gala into the night her whole empire collapsed. Chapter 1: The Suitcases on Magnolia Lane. I came home on June 21, 2024, with a 12-hour shift still sitting in my bones and the smell of antiseptic clinging to my scrubs. Pine County Community Health Center had been short 2 nurses that day, so I had spent most of the afternoon moving from exam room to exam room, checking blood pressure, calming scared children, changing dressings, smiling at patients who needed me to look steadier than I felt. By the time I turned onto Magnolia Lane in Briar Glen, Virginia, all I wanted was a shower, a quiet kitchen, and maybe 10 minutes where nobody needed anything from my hands. Then I saw my suitcases on the porch. They were not thrown there. That was the first thing I noticed. My clothes had not been dumped into trash bags or scattered across the steps. The 2 navy suitcases Caleb and I had bought before our honeymoon were standing upright beside the front door, handles extended, like someone had packed them for a business trip. My toiletry case sat on top of one, my work sneakers were placed beside them, toes aligned. Even my old grey cardigan was folded over the handle with the sleeves tucked in. That neatness told me everything. Vivienne Whittaker had packed my life. My husband, Caleb, stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and the other buried in his pocket. He was 39, general sales manager of Whittaker Auto Group, the kind of man who could close a deal in a glass office, but could not look his wife in the eye when his mother was standing behind him, and she was standing behind him. Vivienne Whittaker, 64 years old, perfectly dressed, perfectly still, wearing a cream jacket and the expression she used at charity luncheons when someone mispronounced a donor's name. Behind Caleb's truck, sitting in the passenger seat with her phone in her hand, was Kelsey Brewer. She was 24, the marketing coordinator at Whittaker Auto Group, with smooth blonde hair and the kind of soft pink blouse Vivienne would have approved of. She did not get out. She did not have to. Her presence in that truck explained what Caleb could not say. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at my husband. Caleb, what is this? His mouth opened, then closed. He glanced back at his mother before he answered, and that small movement hurt more than the suitcases. Mom already prepared the separation papers, he said. It is better this way, better. That was the word he chose for 6 years of marriage. Vivienne stepped forward, her heels clicking once against the porch boards. She looked at me the way she looked at committee reports, dealership numbers, and flower arrangements for the Whittaker Family Foundation Gala, calmly, critically, as if I were one more thing that had failed to meet the family standard. 6 years of nothing, she said. That is what you gave my son. The sentence landed so cleanly I almost did not feel it at first. 6 years of nothing, not 6 years of marriage, not 6 years of trying, not 6 years of appointments and pills and injections and bruises on my stomach, nothing. I stared at Caleb, waiting for him to flinch, to correct her, to say that I had been his wife before I became his diagnosis. He did not. Vivienne continued in that same polished voice, saying Caleb deserved a family, and there were some women who simply were not made to be mothers. She said it as if she were delivering medical fact, not cruelty. As if my body had been stamped defective and she was only reading the label. I asked Caleb if this was what he wanted. He looked past me, toward the maple tree at the edge of the driveway, and said nothing. That was my answer. I turned my head toward the truck. Kelsey was still looking down, but I saw the way her thumb had stopped moving across the screen. She was listening. I wanted to hate her, part of me did, but in that moment, what I saw was not a woman loved by my husband. I saw a younger woman placed exactly where Vivienne wanted her, soft, available, untested, still useful to the Whittaker name, a replacement, or maybe a candidate. 3 houses down, a lawnmower cut off. I looked toward the sound and saw Rowan Calloway standing in his front yard, one hand on the mower handle. He had moved into the old cottage at the lower end of Magnolia Lane after his father died. People in Briar Glen said he had been county sheriff for 8 years, then stepped away without explaining much. He was 43, quiet, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who nodded at neighbors but never lingered long enough for gossip to attach to him. He saw the suitcases. He saw Caleb in the doorway. He saw Vivienne behind him and Kelsey in the truck. He did not come charging up the street. He did not make the scene bigger. He simply stood there, silent, as if he understood that some humiliations did not need an audience, even when they already had one. At the time, I still believed my body was the reason I was standing there in my scrubs with my marriage packed into 2 suitcases. I did not know that the diagnosis Vivienne used to call me barren had not begun inside me. It had begun inside Briar Glen Women's Clinic, on a patient-facing summary that did not match the source lab, in notes written by Dr. Leland Fry, and in payments hidden under the pretty phrase Women's Health Outreach. I only knew what I had been told for years. Caleb and I had married in May 2018. The first year, we had been hopeful. We bought a white crib too early because Caleb saw it on sale and laughed when I told him we were tempting fate. By 2020, Vivienne had taken over the subject of children the way she took over everything else. She made the appointment with Dr. Fry herself, telling me he was the most trusted OB-GYN in Briar Glen and practically family. He told me I had diminished ovarian reserve. He said it gently, but Vivienne heard it like a verdict. After that came the calendars, the supplements, the hormone shots, the blood work, the pitying looks. I learned to inject myself in the bathroom while Caleb stood outside the door asking if I was almost done. I learned to smile at baby showers. I learned to apologize for monthly bleeding as if it were a personal failure. Once, I scheduled a second opinion in Charlottesville. Caleb cancelled it 3 days later and said his mother had already handled everything. Another time, I asked why every test seemed to be mine and whether he should have a semen analysis too. Vivienne cut in before he could answer, saying her son was perfectly healthy. Caleb never corrected her. Now he stood on our porch while his mother finished the work. Dr. Fry's diagnosis had started. I walked up the steps and reached for the suitcase handle. My hand was steady. That surprised me. I had held pressure on bleeding wounds with less control than I used on that handle. Vivienne watched my face, waiting for tears. Maybe she wanted them. Maybe she needed me to collapse so she could tell the town I was unstable, bitter, hysterical, everything but betrayed. I did not give her that. I carried the first suitcase to my car, then the second. Caleb did not help me. Kelsey did not look up again. Vivienne remained on the porch, small and elegant and poisonous against the white door. When I backed out of the driveway, I did not look in the rearview mirror. I drove to Gail Morrison's house because I had nowhere else to go. Gail worked with me at Pine County Community Health Center as a medical coder, and she had been my friend long enough to know when silence meant I was holding myself together by force. She opened the door before I knocked twice. She saw my scrubs, my suitcases, my face, and pulled me inside without asking the first question. Later, at her kitchen table, she slid her phone across to me. The screen showed a photo from a Whitaker Auto Group event 6 weeks earlier. Caleb stood beside a new showroom banner with his hand resting lightly at Kelsey Brewer's lower back. Kelsey was smiling up at him. Behind them, Vivienne faced the camera with the expression of a woman watching a plan move exactly on schedule. That was when I understood Kelsey had not been a mistake. She had been selected. By nightfall, Gail had helped me find a furnished cottage for rent on Magnolia Lane, 3 houses down from Rowan Calloway. The landlord wanted $1,050 a month, more than I wanted to spend, but it had a working lock, a narrow porch, and enough room for my suitcases. That was all I needed. The first night, I sat outside with a mug of coffee that had gone cold in my hands. The air smelled like cut grass and magnolia leaves. Somewhere down the lane, a porch light clicked off. I thought I had lost my husband, my home, my reputation, and maybe even the last fragile trust I had in my own body. I did not know yet that Rowan Calloway, the quiet man 3 houses down, would soon ask me the one question nobody in the Whitaker family had ever wanted answered. Who diagnosed you? Chapter 2. 6 years of being blamed. The question stayed with me longer than the cold coffee did. For the first 3 nights in that cottage, I told myself Rowan Calloway had only asked what any reasonable person would ask. Who diagnosed you? A simple question. 4 words, but after 6 years of being told what was wrong with me, I realized almost nobody had ever asked where that truth had come from. Caleb had never asked. Vivienne had never allowed the question. I had barely asked it myself. The cottage on Magnolia Lane was small enough that every sound had a place. The refrigerator clicked at night. The old pipes knocked when the shower warmed up. The kitchen window stuck half open unless I lifted it with both hands. But for the first time in years, nobody was standing over me with a vitamin bottle, a fertility calendar, or a look that said my body had disappointed an entire family. I went back to work because I did not know how to do anything else. Pine County Community Health Center needed nurses more than Briar Glen needed gossip, and I needed the rhythm of normal things. Blood pressure cuffs, vaccine trays, patient charts. The soft voice I used with elderly patients when they were scared. I had been a registered nurse for 13 years. I knew how to stay calm when a child could not breathe, when a diabetic patient came in shaking, when a woman twice my age grabbed my wrist and asked if she was going to be all right. But staying calm while my own name moved through town was harder. At Donnelly Pharmacy, Mrs. Elaine Donnelly looked up from the greeting card aisle and smiled at me with pity sharp enough to cut skin. She was 67, president of the Briar Glen Women's League, and one of Vivienne's closest social friends. She touched my arm as if we were standing beside a hospital bed. "Some women are simply not built for motherhood," she said. "The Lord gives each of us a different path." I looked down at her manicured hand until she removed it. Then I paid for my allergy medicine and left without giving her the scene she wanted. 2 days later, a cashier at Bailey's grocery paused while scanning my carton of eggs. Her eyes flicked to my left hand, to the pale line where my wedding ring used to sit, then back to my face. She asked if I was the nurse whose husband owned the big dealership on Route 29. I said Caleb did not own it. His family did. She blushed, then whispered that she hoped things worked out. In the church parking lot the next Sunday, a woman I had once brought soup to after her hip surgery told me she was praying Caleb would finally have a family. She said it kindly. That was the worst part. In Briar Glen, cruelty often arrived wrapped in concern. Everywhere I went, I felt Vivienne's version of the story moving ahead of me, opening doors before I reached them. Poor Caleb, poor Whitaker family, 6 years waiting. 6 years with a wife who could not give them a child. Nobody said poor Rory. At night the memories came in pieces. The first hormone shot. The bruise that spread purple and green across my stomach. Caleb standing outside the bathroom door, asking if I was almost done because his mother was waiting downstairs. Vivienne sliding prenatal vitamins across her dining room table like performance reviews. Dr. Leland Fry telling me my ovarian reserve was diminished, his voice gentle, his hands folded over my chart. I remembered the way Vivienne had sat beside Caleb in that first appointment at Briar Glen Women's Clinic, though she had no business being there. She had used the phrase family legacy before Dr. Fry even explained the blood work. She had nodded as if she understood everything better than I did, as if my body were a family asset that had failed inspection. Once, in 2022, I asked Caleb why every test seemed to be mine. We were in our kitchen. I had a cotton ball taped to the inside of my elbow from another blood draw. Caleb was scrolling through emails from Whitaker Auto Group, half listening. I said maybe he should have a semen analysis too, just to rule things out. His face tightened before he even answered. Then Vivienne, who had walked in without knocking because that was what she did, said her son was perfectly healthy. Caleb looked relieved that she had answered for him. That was the part I could not stop replaying. Not just what Vivienne said, but how easily Caleb let her say it. Near the end of June, her reach found me at work. Dr. Helen Mercer called me into her office just after lunch. She was 54, silver-haired, direct, the kind of medical director who could make a drug rep sweat with one question. I thought I was being written up for something. A missed signature, a patient complaint, a mistake I had made because I had not slept. Instead, she handed me a letter printed on thick cream paper. It was from Dale Everett, the Whitaker family attorney. He did not accuse me directly. Men like Dale rarely did that on paper. He wrote that I was going through domestic instability. He expressed concern about emotional distress. He suggested that my personal situation might affect patient care if not handled responsibly. It was polite, it was careful, It was poison. My hands went cold. Dr. Mercer watched my face and said she had reviewed my work record. No complaints, no medication errors, no pattern of instability. Then she leaned back in her chair and said something I never forgot. They are trying to make your pain look like incompetence. That sentence did something to me. Until then, I had thought Vivienne wanted my marriage gone, my house gone, my name dragged through the church parking lot and grocery store aisles. But sitting in Dr. Mercer's office, I understood she wanted more. She wanted my profession questioned, my judgment, my hands, the one part of me I had never let Caleb or his mother touch. I folded the letter and asked if my job was at risk. Not from me, Dr. Mercer said. But be careful, people with money often prefer paper cuts to open wounds. That evening, Gail came to the cottage with takeout. Neither of us ate. She spread napkins across my little kitchen table, then asked if I still had any of my fertility paperwork. Gail was a medical coder, which meant she saw the skeleton beneath every chart, diagnosis codes, billing trails, physician notes. The quiet language that followed patients from office to office. I found an old folder in the second suitcase. It held appointment summaries, lab slips, insurance explanations, and the printed pages Dr. Fry's office had handed me after visits. Gail read longer than I expected. Her brow tightened at certain lines. She said a diagnosis, once it gets repeated, starts to behave like fact. It sits in charts. It informs future decisions. It changes how doctors see you before they even meet you. I asked her if she thought Dr. Fry had been wrong. She did not answer quickly. Gail was careful that way. She tapped one page with her fingernail and said some of the language looked stronger than the attached numbers deserved. That was the first time the fear shifted. Until then, I had been afraid the file would prove Vivienne right. Now I was afraid it would prove something worse. Gail told me to request my complete medical file under HIPAA, not just the summaries I had been given, everything. Lab results, physician notes, outside referrals, ultrasound reports, billing codes, patient-facing summaries, appointment logs. The thought made my stomach twist. If the complete file said I was the problem, I would have to face it without the fog of denial. Gail looked at me across the table and said, "Then let the file say that. But do not let Vivienne say it for you." The next morning my kitchen window jammed again. I was fighting it with both palms when a knock sounded at the side door. Rowan stood on the small porch with a toolbox in one hand. He said old windows like to win arguments. I almost laughed. Almost. He fixed the latch in less than 10 minutes. I made coffee because I did not know how else to thank him. We sat on the porch with the mugs balanced on the railing. He did not ask about Caleb. He did not ask about Kelsey. He let the quiet sit long enough that I finally filled part of it. I told him my husband had left because I could not have children. Rayan looked out toward the street, where the late June heat shimmered above the pavement. He said nothing for a moment. Then he asked who diagnosed me, that question again. Clean, unemotional, impossible to dodge. I told him Dr. Leland Fry at Briar Glen Women's Clinic. Something changed in his face. Not much, a pause, a narrowing of the eyes, the kind of reaction a former sheriff might have when a name landed somewhere it did not belong. He did not say Dr. Fry was bad. He did not say Vivienne was lying. He only said if I ever wanted a second opinion somewhere outside Briar Glen, somewhere the Whitakers did not fund, he knew a place in Richmond. I asked why he would help me. He looked at the repaired window, then back at me, and said some families in small towns got used to people mistaking money for truth. That afternoon, I drafted the request. I wrote it at my kitchen table, in the same careful language I used when documenting patient care. I requested my complete medical file from Briar Glen Women's Clinic, including lab results, physician notes, outside referrals, ultrasound reports, billing codes, patient-facing summaries, and appointment logs related to my fertility treatment. I cited my rights under HIPAA. I signed Aurelia Vance because that was still my legal name, even if everyone in town had already started erasing me from the Whitaker story. When I called the clinic to confirm where to send it, the receptionist sounded normal until I gave my name. Then her voice thinned. She said she would have to ask Dr. Fry. I said she could notify Dr. Fry, but the request was mine to make and the file was mine to receive. There was a silence on the line. For the first time in weeks, I did not rush to soften it. After I mailed the request and sent a scanned copy by secure email, I sat in the cottage until the light changed on the kitchen floor. Nothing dramatic happened, no thunder, no phone call from Vivienne, no instant proof that I had been wronged, but something had shifted inside me. For 6 years I had waited for other people to tell me what my body meant. Dr. Fry, Vivienne, Caleb, nurses at labs, women in church parking lots, people who spoke about me as if I were a failed room in a house they owned. Now I had asked for the file, not the story. The file. That night, after staring at Rowan's number for almost 10 minutes, I called him. When he answered, I looked at the locked window he had fixed and said, "That place you mentioned, I think I am ready." Roden did not sound pleased with himself. He did not sound like a man stepping into a rescue story. He only said he would make the call. After we hung up, I stood in the quiet kitchen with my phone still in my hand. I was still scared the record would confirm every cruel word Vivienne had ever said. But for the first time since the suitcases on the porch, fear was not the only thing in the room. There was also a question, and soon there would be data. Chapter 3: The Second Opinion. And the first. Rowan made the appointment for the last Thursday in July. He did not make it sound dramatic. He did not call it a rescue. He simply knocked on my cottage door 2 evenings later and handed me a folded note with the address of Callaway Reproductive Health in Richmond, the appointment time, and the name Dr. Priya Anand written in careful block letters. "If you want to go, I can drive," he said. I looked at the note longer than I needed to. Richmond felt far enough from Briar Glen to be another country. Far enough from Vivienne's church friends, from Whittaker Auto Group banners, from Dr. Fry's office with its beige walls and framed photographs of smiling babies. "Why Richmond?" I asked. "Because nobody there owes the Whittakers anything." That was the answer that made me go. The morning of the appointment, I wore jeans and a pale blue blouse instead of scrubs because I needed to feel like a woman, not a patient and not a nurse. Rowan drove without filling the silence. He let the highway noise do most of the talking. Every mile away from Briar Glen should have made me breathe easier, but my stomach kept tightening. Part of me still wanted Dr. Fry to be right. That sounds terrible, but it was true. If he was right, then the cruelty had a shape I understood. My body had failed. Caleb had left. Vivienne had been vicious, but the facts were the facts. If he was wrong, then 6 years of grief had been built on something worse than bad news. It had been built on someone else's decision. Callaway Reproductive Health did not look like any clinic I had visited before. The Richmond campus was glass, brick, and quiet competence. The lobby had soft chairs, real plants, and no wall of baby photos watching women as they checked in. I noticed that first. No smiling infants, no miracle wall, no silent accusation. The receptionist looked up when Rowan stepped beside me. "Good morning, Mr. Callaway," she said warmly enough that I turned my head. Rowan only nodded. "Morning, Elise. This is Rory Vance. She has an appointment with Dr. Anand." Elise did not ask for an explanation. She handed me forms, confirmed my date of birth, and spoke to me like I was the patient, not like Rowan had brought in a problem to be solved. When we sat down, I looked at him. "You know people here?" "My father did," he said. It was not exactly an answer, but I let it rest. There were secrets in him too, but his secrets had never been used to make me feel small. Dr. Priya Anand was 46, with dark hair pulled back and a voice that stayed calm without going cold. She reviewed what I brought, but she did not let Dr. Fry's words lead the appointment. "We are going to start with current data," she said. "Not shame, not assumptions, data." That sentence nearly undid me. I had heard so many soft versions of blame that a clean sentence felt almost violent. She ordered blood work, an ultrasound, thyroid testing, AMH, FSH, estradiol, the familiar alphabet of fertility that had followed me for years. I lay on the exam table staring at ceiling tiles, telling myself I was a nurse, telling myself I understood labs were not moral judgments, telling myself not to cry before anyone had even given me results. Rayan waited in the lobby. He had offered to leave if I wanted privacy. I told him to stay because I did not want to walk out into an empty waiting room if the news broke me. 3 days later, Dr. Anand called me back to Richmond. This time Gail came with me. She said a woman should never have to receive life-changing medical news with only vending machine coffee for support. Rowan drove. Gail sat beside me in the back, and nobody talked about the fact that my hands were clenched so tightly my nails left marks in my palms. Dr. Anand had the results printed and arranged in front of her. She did not smile too quickly. Good doctors know better than to smile before a patient understands why. Your AMH is within expected range for your age, she said. Your FSH is not elevated. Your estradiol is not showing the pattern I would expect with the diagnosis you were given. Your ultrasound does not support diminished ovarian reserve. I heard each sentence, but my mind would not arrange them into meaning. So what does that mean? I asked. Dr. Anand folded her hands. It means your current labs do not match the diagnosis you were given. Gail reached for my hand under the table. I did not cry. Not then. I just sat there as if the room had tilted slightly and everyone else was pretending the floor was still level. For 6 years, I had apologized to Caleb every month. I had watched pregnancy announcements with my throat closed. I had let Vivienne speak about my body in the third person while I sat across from her at dinner. I had accepted pain because I thought pain was the price of trying. And now this doctor, this calm woman in Richmond, was telling me the numbers did not match the shame. Could Dr. Fry have been mistaken? I asked. Dr. Anand was careful. Doctors can interpret results differently. But the gap between your history and your current testing is significant enough that I recommend reviewing your full medical record, including source lab reports, not just summaries. Not just summaries. The words followed me home. The file from Briar Glen Women's Clinic arrived 9 days later in a padded envelope too thin for 6 years of pain. Gail came over after work, still in her cardigan from the coding office. We cleared my kitchen table and spread the pages in careful piles. Lab reports, visit summaries, physician notes, ultrasound descriptions, billing codes, appointment records. I read like a nurse first, then like a wounded woman. The first crack appeared in a 2021 lab report from Charlottesville Reference Diagnostics. The source lab showed my FSH at 6.8. Not elevated. Not alarming. Not the number Dr. Fry had leaned on when he told me my ovarian reserve was declining faster than expected. But in his patient-finding summary, the interpretation read consistent with diminished ovarian reserve. Gail tapped the page with her pen. The lab says one thing. The summary pushes harder. My skin went cold. He told me that summary was the simple version, I said. He said I did not need to worry about the raw numbers. Gail looked at me gently. That is how people get trapped, Rory. They trust the person not translating. The second crack was worse. A report from March 12, 2023 listed the collection location as Briar Glen Women's Clinic main office. It was a Sunday. The clinic was closed on Sundays. There was no appointment record attached, no check-in log, no nurse initials on the schedule, just a result sitting in my chart like it had always belonged there. I stared at the date. I remember that weekend, I said. Caleb and I were in Roanoke for his dealership conference. Gail stopped writing. You are sure? I wore the green dress Vivienne said made me look tired. I remember because I cried in the hotel bathroom. The third crack came from the billing side. Gail found diagnosis codes repeated across visits even when the attached labs did not justify the strength of the notes. She explained it simply, because she knew I could understand the technical part but not the betrayal underneath it. A code can follow a patient, she said. Once it is there, it shapes the next decision. If the summary is wrong and the code supports it, the story starts looking official. The story, that was what Vivienne had always understood. A woman did not have to be broken if the paperwork could make her look broken. Warren Morrison joined us 2 evenings later. Gail's husband was a deputy clerk at the county records office, quiet and methodical, the kind of man who alphabetized receipts. He made it clear he could not and would not access anything private. But public filings were public filings. He brought copies of Whitaker Family Foundation Form 990 disclosures and grant records. From 2019 to 2024, the foundation had sent $72,450 to Briar Glen Women's Clinic under phrases that sounded noble. Women's health outreach, rural fertility access grants, community education. Warren adjusted his glasses and said he could not find any matching public events, brochures, attendance lists, or reports. There may be explanations, he said. But if a foundation funds outreach, usually there is outreach. The payments lined up too neatly with the years. Dr. Fry's summaries grew darker. $9,500 in 2019. $11,750 in 2021. $14,200 in 2023. Each number felt less like money and more like a brick in the wall they had built around me. Around that time, Gail heard something at Vittorio's on Main Street. She had stopped in for soup after work and saw Vivienne at a corner table with Caleb and Kelsey. Gail was not trying to listen, she told me, but Vivienne had the kind of voice that believed rooms belonged to her. She was asking Kelsey about vitamins, cycles, doctors. Kelsey looked embarrassed. Caleb looked at his menu. Then Vivienne said 6 months was enough time to know whether a woman suited a family. When Gail told me, I expected jealousy to rise first. It did not. What rose was recognition. Kelsey had not escaped the trap by replacing me. She had stepped into it. In early September, Carolyn Reed came to my cottage after sunset. She was 41, a third-grade teacher with tired eyes and a folder clutched against her chest. She said she heard I had been asking questions about Dr. Fry. I do not want trouble, she said from my porch. I just want to know if he did it to you too. I let her in. Carolyn told me Dr. Fry had once said her chances of having a child were nearly gone. She had spent money she did not have, taken hormones that made her sick, and watched her marriage collapse under the weight of a diagnosis she later learned another doctor would not have given from the same data. I thought I was the only one, she whispered. That was the moment my story stopped being only mine. By the second week of September, the folder on my kitchen table had become something else. Dr. Anand's results, the Charlottesville source lab, Dr. Fry's summaries, the Sunday collection report, billing codes, foundation filings, Carolyn's written statement. I filed the complaint with the Virginia Board of Medicine on a Tuesday morning before work. My hands did not shake when I attached the documents. Vivienne had wanted a scene from me. She had wanted tears on the porch, anger in the grocery store, a mistake at work, anything she could point to and call instability. I did not give her a scene. I gave her a complaint number. That night, long after I turned off the kitchen light, Dr. Leland Fry received notice that a preliminary review had been opened. I did not know that until later. I also did not know he called Vivienne before he called his attorney. But I would learn that when she told him it was only paperwork, and I was just a bitter woman trying to punish the Whittaker name. His voice shook badly enough that even she could hear it. What exactly did you make me do? For the first time, the man in the white coat heard the sound of paper turning around and coming back for him. Chapter 4, the money, the file, and the man who didn't want to know. By October, the lie began losing the luxury of silence. I did not see Dr. Marianne Chase walk into Briar Glen Women's Clinic with her state badge and a formal request from the Virginia Board of Medicine. I learned about it later from the documents, from the way people in town suddenly stopped saying Dr. Fry's name too loudly, and from the nervous look on the receptionist's face when I passed her in the grocery store. Dr. Chase requested full charts, audit trails, appointment logs, source lab files, physician notes, and patient-facing summaries. She did not ask for the polished version. She asked for the machinery underneath it. That was where Dr. Fry's trouble began. The source lab files were not sitting in his office where a nervous doctor could lose them in a drawer. They were with Charlottesville Reference Diagnostics, time-stamped, archived, and tied to systems he did not control. The numbers had not changed. Only the story he wrote around them had. I kept going to work. I kept checking blood pressure and calling patients by name. I kept washing my hands until my skin cracked in the cold weather. I told myself the complaint would move slowly, because official things usually did. But Vivienne moved faster. The second letter from Dale Everett arrived at Pine County Community Health Center on a Tuesday morning in November. Dr. Helen Mercer called me into her office with the letter already open on her desk. This one was sharper than the first. Dale suggested I was using my medical knowledge to harass a respected physician. He implied my domestic conflict with the Whittaker family had spilled into my workplace. He used words like disruption, judgment, and liability. I read the letter once, then put it down. She is trying to make me look dangerous, I said. Dr. Mercer's expression did not change. She is trying to make you look expensive to protect. That frightened me more. 2 days later, Dale Everett came in person. He wore a charcoal suit and the soft smile of a man who made threats sound like professional courtesy. I was charting outside exam room 3 when I saw him through the glass, standing in Dr. Mercer's doorway. I did not go in. I did not need to. Dr. Mercer had already told me not to let anyone pull me into a hallway performance. What surprised me was Rowan. He arrived 10 minutes later, not in uniform, not with a badge, just in a dark jacket with his hands empty. He did not storm in, he did not raise his voice. He spoke to Dr. Mercer first, then to Dale, calm enough that the calm itself felt like a warning. I heard only pieces from the nurse's station. Formal complaint, suspected medical misconduct, retaliation against a medical whistleblower. Dale's smile thinned. Later Rowan found me by the side exit while I was taking out a bag of paper gowns for disposal. I did not speak for you, he said. I know, you filed the complaint, you kept the records, Dr. Mercer is standing behind your work. I just reminded him that paper cuts leave blood too. That was the kind of help Rowan gave. He did not step in front of me. He stood beside the door Vivienne was trying to slam shut. By December, Carolyn Reed had sent her formal statement. Her handwriting was small and careful, like she was still afraid of taking up too much space. She described Dr. Fry's diagnosis, the treatments, the money, the marriage that had cracked under a label another doctor later questioned. Dr. Chase contacted at least 2 other women. I did not know their names then, only that my file was no longer standing alone. Parts are harder to dismiss than pain. Vivienne came to my cottage the week before Christmas. I opened the door and found her on my porch in a wool coat the color of winter cream. She had not called. Women like Vivienne did not ask permission to enter spaces they believed were beneath them. This is a sad little place, she said, looking past me into the kitchen. It is mine, I said. That bothered her more than the poverty of it. She stepped inside without being invited, but I did not move far enough to make her comfortable. She kept her gloves on. You are damaging the reputation of a clinic that helped women in this county for decades. Helped them, I said, or labeled them. Her eyes sharpened. You have no idea what you are doing. I know exactly what I filed. This could be easier for you. The divorce settlement. The transition. Caleb wants a clean break. Caleb wanted that before I filed anything. Vivienne looked at me then, really looked, and for 1 second the charity chairwoman disappeared. What remained was something colder and older. Caleb wanted a future, she said. You were standing in front of it. The room went very quiet. I thought of the injections, the appointments, the way she had watched my stomach, my calendar, my face every month. Did you ever see me as your daughter-in-law? I asked. Vivienne did not blink. The Whittaker name survives through children. There it was. No softness, no disguise. I had not failed as a person in her eyes. I had failed as a vessel. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table until the porch light came on by itself. I did not cry. I wrote down every word I could remember. In January 2025, the divorce was finalized. Caleb signed the uncontested agreement quickly because he wanted his clean break, and because there were no children, no shared business, and not enough property in my name for him to fight over without looking cruel. I became Aurelia Vance again on paper, though most people still called me Rory. The legal ending came quietly, without music or apology. Rowan and I did not become a love story overnight. He brought me coffee sometimes. He fixed the porch step after I nearly twisted my ankle. He sat with me when another envelope from the board came and said nothing unless I asked him to. I learned that quiet could be generous when it was not being used as punishment. Kelsey learned something too. Gail heard part of it first from a woman who worked reception at Whittaker Auto Group, then Kelsey confirmed it later in a way no one expected. Vivienne had started sending her vitamins, then doctor recommendations, then little questions about cycles and family history. At first, Kelsey thought it was attention. Then she heard Vivienne talking to Caleb behind the glass wall of his office. If she is not pregnant by the end of the year, the Brewer family is not so important that we cannot move on. Kelsey had been sitting outside with a folder of ad proofs in her lap. She heard every word. That was when the replacement learned she was replaceable. Caleb began to unravel in April. A local blog mentioned that Briar Glen Women's Clinic was under state review. Nothing detailed, just enough for the town to start whispering in the other direction. Caleb asked Vivienne about it. She told him I was bitter. She told him I had always been fragile. She told him the board would see through me. But old questions had started crawling out of the places he had buried them. Why had Dr. Fry never pushed male testing? Why had his mother always attended appointments that were not hers? Why had I cried in the kitchen in 2022 asking him to just check, just once? And why had he been so relieved when Vivienne answered for him? He found the envelope in Vivienne's study while looking for dealership papers. It was from 2017, before our wedding. A Richmond lab, his name, his date of birth. On the outside in Vivienne's handwriting were 5 words: "Do not discuss with Caleb." Inside was a semen analysis showing severe male factor infertility, extremely low motility, recommended follow-up. He called his mother from the driveway. I know this because he told me later, and because by then Caleb had lost the ability to make the story sound better. "What is this?" he asked her. Vivienne told him she had protected him. "Protected me from what?" he said. "The truth." "No," she answered. "From shame." That was the center of her. Not love, not family. Shame. She had chosen my body as the place to bury his, but Caleb was not innocent just because he had been lied to. He had 6 years to ask the question, 6 years to trust the woman sleeping beside him, 6 years to step into one exam room without his mother. He did not know because not knowing had been easier. That same month, Dr. Anand confirmed I was pregnant, twins. I sat in her Richmond office with the ultrasound image in my hands while Rowan stood beside me, one hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. There was no confusion about the father. Caleb and I had legally separated the previous July. The divorce had been final since January. Rowan and I had come slowly, carefully, after the wreckage, not inside it still. Fear rose before joy. "What if people think this is the proof?" I whispered. Dr. Anand looked at me over the edge of the chart. "These babies do not prove your worth," she said. "They only prove Vivienne lied." I held on to that sentence harder than I held the ultrasound. In May, the Whitaker Family Foundation announced its annual gala at Briar Glen Civic Hall. 240 guests, women's health and family resilience as the theme. I almost laughed when Gail showed me the invitation. Vivienne was going to stand beneath flowers and talk about honest care while the board had her doctor's files under review. "I am not going," I said. Gail looked at me across the break room table. "If she is going to use a stage to talk about women like you, then your silence has a right to be in that room too." The day before the gala, Gail sent me a screenshot. It was from the Virginia Board of Medicine public licensing portal. Dr. Leland Fry's status had changed to temporary suspension pending investigation. Barton Gazette had not published yet, but Gail knew a local reporter who watched public records the way some people watched weather. The storm was already forming. I stood in my bedroom with the phone in my hand and the navy dress hanging on the closet door. For months, I had avoided rooms where people thought they knew my story. I had let my absence protect me, not this time. That night, Caleb sat in his car outside Vivienne's house with the 2017 envelope on the passenger seat. Across town, I stood in front of my mirror with one hand resting over a pregnancy not yet visible beneath the dress. Neither of us slept much. By morning, the Whitaker Gala was no longer a charity event. It was the room where 6 years of lies would change owners. Chapter 5, the gala where the story changed owners. The first thing I noticed when I walked into Briar Glen Civic Hall was the flowers. White roses, pale hydrangeas, silver ribbon, glass vases tall enough to make conversation difficult across the tables. Vivienne had always believed elegance could disinfect anything. If a room was polished enough, if the linens were pressed enough, if the donors were flattered enough, nobody would ask what the money had really touched. The Whitaker Family Foundation annual gala had 240 guests that night. Business owners, church leaders, women's league members, local doctors, dealership employees, donors, reporters, and people who had once lowered their voices when I walked past them in the pharmacy aisle. They came dressed for charity. They came believing Vivienne Whitaker still owned the room. She did, at first. Vivienne stood near the stage in a silver dress, hair perfect, pearls resting at her throat, greeting people as if nothing in her world had cracked. Caleb stood several feet away from her, jaw tight, one hand in his jacket pocket. Kelsey Brewer stood beside him, but not close enough to look comfortable. She was pale under the warm lights. She had already learned what I learned too late. In Vivienne's family, a woman was never chosen. She was evaluated. Gail walked in beside me. I wore the navy dress I had stared at the night before. It was simple, fitted enough to make me feel like myself, loose enough that nobody could tell what I was not ready to explain. I did not come to shout. I did not come to overturn tables. I came because I was tired of being absent while other people narrated my life. The room noticed me in pieces, first the women from church, then Mrs. Elaine Donnelly from the Women's League, then a few dealership employees. Whispers moved faster than waiters. Vivienne saw me and smiled with only the lower half of her face. She crossed the room like she was greeting a guest she had not personally tried to erase. She said she was surprised I came. I told her I knew how important women's health was to the foundation. For the first time, her smile hesitated. Rowan arrived 10 minutes later with Tessa Calloway, 68 years old, chairwoman of the Calloway Medical Network Board, and another board member I had met only once. Rowan wore a dark suit and no expression. He did not move like a man trying to impress anyone. That was why people looked twice. Jerry Pratt, who had hosted half the public events in Briar Glen since I was in high school, stepped to the microphone to welcome the evening's special guests. He introduced Rowan Calloway as a former county sheriff, then as a board member of Calloway Medical Network, a regional system with 7 hospitals, 26 outpatient clinics, and 4 reproductive health centers across Virginia and North Carolina. The air changed. Vivienne's eyes moved from Rowan to me, and for one quiet second, she understood that the man she had dismissed as my neighbor had roots in a system bigger than her social circle, bigger than her dealership, bigger than Briar Glen Women's Clinic. Rowan did not look at her. He looked at me, then stood still. He was not there to speak for me. He was there so I would not have to stand alone. Vivienne went on stage after dinner. Her voice was smooth, practiced, generous in the way wealthy people sound when they are giving away money that buys them admiration. She spoke about family values. She spoke about trust. She spoke about women in rural communities deserving honest care, compassionate medicine, and the dignity of being heard. Gail's hand found mine under the table. I did not interrupt. I let Vivienne keep talking. Some traps work better when people build them around themselves. Halfway through her speech, the first phone lit up, then another, then a table near the back went silent. Someone whispered Dr. Fry's name. A reporter from the Barton Gazette stood near the wall, reading from his screen. The article had gone live. It was based on the Virginia Board of Medicine public licensing portal. Dr. Leland Fry had been temporarily suspended pending investigation into fertility records, patient-facing summaries, appointment irregularities, and financial relationships connected to a local family foundation. No one had leaked anything. No one had screamed. No one had invented a rumor. The record was public. Vivienne stopped speaking for half a breath, then tried to continue, but the room had already left her. People were reading. People were connecting names. People were looking at the Whitaker Family Foundation banner behind her, and then at me. Caleb moved first. He walked to the front with the old envelope in his hand, the one from 2017, the one Vivienne had labeled not to discuss with him. His face looked older than it had on the porch. The day he let me carry my suitcases alone, he did not read the private medical results aloud. Even then, he had enough sense not to turn his own body into another public spectacle, but he held the envelope where his mother could see it. He told her she had let me take the blame for something she knew was his. Vivienne stepped down from the stage and reached for his arm. She told him this was not the place. For once, Caleb did not move with her. She said she had protected him. She said people could be cruel. She said a man in his position, with his name, could not carry that kind of shame through a town like Briar Glen. Not once did she say she was sorry to me. That was what finally freed me from the last small piece of wanting an apology. Caleb turned toward me. His eyes were wet, but grief did not make him innocent. He said he did not know. I believed that part. He had not known everything, but he had known enough to avoid knowing more. I told him he did not know because not knowing had been easier for him. The room went still. Then I asked him if I had brought him the records before his mother lost control of the story. Would he have believed me? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That silence answered 6 years. Kelsey stepped away from him then. It was small at first, just the distance of one shoe length, then another. Vivienne noticed and snapped her name like a command. Kelsey looked at her and said she was not going to be the next woman on a 6-month clock. Then she left. No drama, no tears. Just a young woman walking out before Vivienne could measure her body too. Vivienne turned on me because that was the only direction left. She said I was destroying a family. She said I had always wanted revenge. She said I had poisoned Caleb against his own blood. I said she had called me barren because the truth embarrassed her, that was all. No speech. No screaming, no trembling hand. Just one sentence. and the woman who had controlled every room in Briar Glen for decades could not answer it. Dale Everett tried to step in, but Tessa Calloway spoke before Rowan did. She reminded him that the article was based on a public licensing record and an active formal process. Her voice was gentle enough to be polite and firm enough to end the conversation. After that night, the story did what truth does once it escapes a locked room. It spread without needing me to push it. The board investigation expanded. Dr. Marion Chase found a pattern in Dr. Fry's files, patient-facing summaries that sounded worse than the source labs. Diagnoses repeated beyond what the data supported, appointment logs missing, billing irregularities, financial relationships with the Whitaker Family Foundation that should have been disclosed and were not. Carolyn Reed submitted her statement. Other women followed. Briar Glen Women's Clinic reduced services, then suspended operations while the investigation continued. In August 2025, Dr. Fry's emergency suspension was extended, and the board released a consent order. By the end of the year, he surrendered his license before full revocation proceedings finished. His records were referred for possible falsification of medical documents and insurance-related misconduct. The Whitaker Family Foundation did not escape either. The State Charity Bureau reviewed the Women's Health Outreach and Rural Fertility Access Grants, the $72,450 sent from 2019 through 2024 with no real outreach programs to match them, no attendance lists, no reports, no brochures, no community events. Vivienne was forced out as chairwoman. Mrs. Elaine Donnelly, who once told me some women were not built for motherhood, delivered the Women's League request that Vivienne step down from her honorary position. That part made Gail laugh for nearly a full minute. Caleb was not charged with a crime. He had not written the summaries. He had not sent the foundation checks. But he lost Kelsey, lost the town's sympathy, and lost much of his authority at Whitaker Auto Group when the family governance review began. Charity tie-ins disappeared. Donors pulled back. By December, he sold part of the dealership interest and left Briar Glen quietly. His punishment was not prison. It was memory. He had to live with the knowledge that he abandoned a wife who had begged him to ask one honest question. I filed a civil malpractice claim against Dr. Fry and Briar Glen Women's Clinic. The settlement was sealed, which suited me fine. I did not need a headline for that part. I used some of it to start a patient records advocacy fund through Callaway Medical Network, helping women request complete files, understand lab reports, learn their HIPAA rights, and seek second opinions when a diagnosis felt wrong. Rowan and I married quietly near the end of the year. No gala, no foundation banner, no white roses tall enough to hide behind. Gail and Warren were there. Dr. Mercer was there. Dr. Anand was there. A few people who had believed me before it was safe to believe me. When the twins grew strong enough on the ultrasound for me to stop holding my breath every time a doctor entered the room, I still reminded myself of what Dr. Anand had said. They did not prove my worth, they proved Vivienne lied. At the end of 2025, I sat on the porch of the cottage on Magnolia Lane with the old folder on my lap. The HIPAA request, the source labs, the board complaint, the licensing order, the settlement notice. Paper, paper, paper. The kind Vivienne had trusted when it served her. The kind that finally served the truth. I placed the folder in a drawer and closed it. Ron was in the kitchen making coffee. Outside, the wind moved through the magnolia tree. For the first time in years, I did not feel like a broken woman waiting for someone else to define me. 6 years of lies began in a clinic. They ended in a small cottage, with my name back in my own mouth. So tell me, who betrayed me the worst? Caleb for choosing silence, Vivienne for buying the lie, or Dr. Fry for selling his oath? And if you had been in that room, would you have exposed Vivienne at the gala, or would you have let the medical board destroy her quietly?